spent a lot of time putting that together, as you can tell. My grandson looked over at me a while ago there in the pew and he said, "We're finished with John?" I said, "Yeah." Our first sermon from John was September of 22, and our last one was last week. And doing something a little different for me, a little more awkward for me. I like plowing verse by verse through books, and we will do that again at the end of this summer when we study Philippians. But we're doing something a little different here. But before I get into that, this is a time of year that begins a lot of things. It's the beginning of the end of school. And with the end of school comes a lot of camps and vacation Bible schools and mission trips and things like that. It's a really intense time where we have an opportunity to be light in unique and wonderful ways. And so be in prayer for this very busy time that we have ahead of us. In fact, I'll be leading this month a mission trip to Kentucky, to Sunrise Children's Services, their home. They're affiliated with the Kentucky Baptist Convention, and we're going to be building 2 houses that'll be used in their foster ministry there. And all that is required is for you to be a man and go. All right, that's all. It's for men only, and we would love to have you there. It doesn't matter what your construction knowledge is. Everything I know about construction, I learned on mission trip and YouTube. I mean, everything. And so most of all of my background, I went on these mission trips and learned how to drive a nail and make sure the board was in the right place when I drove it. And so even if all you can do is carry plywood or encourage others who do, email me, chuck@moore.church, if you would like to go. It's the 26th, the week of the 26th. It's the week of Memorial Day that will be up there. It's also the end next Sunday of Tyler Hennessy's run is our lead contemporary worship leader, and he and Amy have been an incredible blessing to us over the past 15 years. Now, I know if you're in this room, you know how good they are at leading worship. But what you may not know is they're better people than they are worship leaders, and we thank God for them. And I wanted to say that to you to remind you that right after this service, there's going to be a reception across the way in the event center for you to say a word of gratitude to them. Today we commence a summer series, as you saw, entitled Asking for a Friend, and the idea came to me when I was listening to a podcast where Bruce Miller, the author of the 7 Big Questions, was being interviewed. And for this book, he had seen where somebody had done the research and found the most Googled questions about God. And some of those questions are, does life have a purpose? Does God exist? Why does God allow pain and suffering? Is Christianity too restrictive or narrow? Or do all roads lead to God? Is Jesus really God? Is the Bible reliable? Easy questions like that. And so we're going to be dealing with those questions, because questions are something we all have about God. It doesn't matter how long you've been a follower of Christ and how devoted you have been to Him. There's more about Him that you don't know than there is about Him that you do know. Because so much about God is unknowable in the human mind. So much, even the best that we know about God is somewhat dim or foggy. But one day, all that fog and dimness will go away and we'll know Him as we are known. But there's also so much about God that we can know because He chose to reveal Himself to us. He chose to reveal Himself to us through creation. He chose to reveal Himself to us through our consciences. He chose to reveal Himself to us through the circumstances of life. He chose to reveal Himself to us through the Word of God. And He encouraged us to ask questions of Him. Like Jesus said in Matthew, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be open to you. For everyone who asks receives, and he who seeks finds, and to him who knocks it will be open. So today's topic, today's question is, does life have a purpose? And that depends. We're going to answer that question this week from one perspective and next week from another perspective. This week, we're going to seek to answer that question from the perspective of the materialist, the one who thinks that all that exists is what they can see and touch and feel. There is no existence outside of this. There's no spiritual realm. There's no life after death. There's nothing. It's all right here. And so we're going to answer today the question from those who believe that this is all there is. Is there a purpose in life? And next week, we will answer that question based on those who believe there is something beyond this life. There is a God. There is a realm of being outside of the material, and there is life after death. Because the way you answer that question is vastly different in those two perspectives. So does it really matter what we do or what we believe in this life? According to Russian novelist Dostoevsky, he said the secret of man's being is not only to live, but to have something to live for. So I ask you, do you have something to live for? That's what we're looking at. If you are one who does not believe there's anything beyond what you can see and touch, and there's no existence beyond this world, do you have something to live for? What if there is no meaning in life? What if life doesn't have a purpose? Solomon sums it up well in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verses 19 through 20, where he wrote, "For the fate of the sons of men and the fate of the beasts is the same." You're no different than the animals. As one dies, so dies the other. Indeed, they all have the same breath, and there is no advantage for man over beast for all his vanity. All go to the same place. All come from the dust and all return to the dust. You may be a more developed or a higher form of beast, but if there is no God, that is all you are. You have no advantage over them other than the fact that they are not aware of how hopeless life is, and you are. Okay. So there's an advantage even to being a beast over a human being if there is nothing other than what we can see. But we all want our lives to have meaning, but just because we want that doesn't mean it's so. If you were to die today in your memorial service sometime next week, what would be said? What is said there will say a lot about your life and say a lot about whether or not your life was different from that of the beasts. Because if God does not exist, we're all like biological organisms. We die, we cease to exist. With no hope for immortality, our lives lead only to the grave. I love the way David Gerald put it. He said, quote, "Life is hard, then you die. Then they throw dirt in your face. Then the worms eat you. Be grateful it happens in that order," end quote. And that really is a poignant description of life and how we view life and what life means if there is no God. Again, remember the words of Solomon in Ecclesiastes 1. The words of the preacher, the son of David, king in Jerusalem, "Vanity of vanities," says the preacher, "vanity of vanities. All is vanity. All is vain if there is no God." And you notice how he put it. We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. What advantage does man have in all his work, which he does? You see those words right there? They're only found in Ecclesiastes. Under the sun. You see what he's talking about there? We'll get to that in a couple of weeks. Anyway, maybe next week even. A generation goes and a generation comes, but the earth remains forever. Well, that's not very encouraging. But we all know what he means. We know what it's like to think that you're going to have purpose, to think that you're going to have satisfaction, to think that you're going to have meaning through something you accomplish or through something you do or through a relationship that you initiate. We all know what it's like to enter into that and be disappointed that it doesn't provide what we thought we would see it provide. You have a new boyfriend, expect to be deliriously happy perpetually, but the passion fades and the discontent rises. You get a job making more money than you can spend, and you think, I will therefore be perpetually content and perpetually happy, but it doesn't provide what you think it will provide. You finally have a baby, and you expect to have days filled with, well, not sleep. I understand that, okay? But you have a baby. You've been trying a long time to have a baby. You've waited a long time to have a baby, and you finally have a baby, and you expect days filled with happiness as you hold this little life, as you mold this little life, as you point this little life into the future. What could possibly spoil your glee? You tirelessly earn that degree. You get promoted at work to a position higher than you ever anticipated being able to occupy. You retire with enough money to live 50 years, if that's what it means as far as how long you live. And then what? You find it's just another one of those things toward which you work that falls well short of the expectations you had for it. Or in the words of Solomon, vanity of vanity, all is vanities. Or consider the monotony of life. You become weary of the monotonous grind of life. Another diaper to change, another deal to close, another day to work, another meal to plan. It can be overwhelming. And we begin to wonder if life actually has any meaning or purpose. We often see this philosophy reflected in art, and in one form of art is the lyrics of popular songs. Some of those songs stand the test of time, like Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. I'm not going to sing. I'm pretty sure Freddie Mercury and I are in different universes when it comes to singing, and a lot of other things for that matter, but I'm not going to sing. I'm just going to show you some of the lyrics. Is this real life? Is it just fantasy, caught in a landslide, no escape from reality? Nothing really matters. Anyone can see nothing really matters to me. If you came of age in the 70s, you remember Kansas, and you remember a song entitled Dust in the Wind. Just a drop of water in an endless sea. All we do crumbles to the ground, though we refuse to see. Dust in the wind. All we are is dust in the wind. That is the life of the one who sees nothing beyond what is. Otis Redding sang a song that, my goodness, was so popular, but when you look at the lyrics, you think, well, why would that make people happy? Sitting in the morning sun. I'll be sitting when the evening come, watching the ships roll in, and then I'll watch them roll away again. I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, watching the tide roll away. I'm sitting on the dock of the bay, wasting time. In 1992, Tupac recorded Changes, where he rapped, I see no changes. Wake in the morning and I ask myself, is life worth living? Should I blast myself? That was in 1992. In 1996, somebody else blasted him. And what I discovered, evidently I mispronounced Tupac's name in the first service, Tupac. And based on the response I got between services and even in a text message while I was preaching, evidently that's akin to saying Jesus didn't rise from the dead, right? You know, who is the one authority on how a name is pronounced? That person. And he's dead, so I can pronounce it how I want to. I'm the authority on how I pronounce my name. And people sometimes have difficulty knowing how to pronounce my name. And so I say it slow for them. Chuck. All right. Chuck, that's how you pronounce my name. But we see it in lyrics from songs, because people who are trying to make sense of life come to realize there's no sense and there's no hope in life. Do you see yourself in the words of Solomon and those lyricists? Do you have a family member or a friend who sees no hope in life because their view of life is that this is all it is, and they're very distressed and discouraged? Instead of running up to them and saying, you just need to get right with God, go up to them and say, I love you. And I understand where you're coming from, and help them see in you the hope they don't have. Instead of berating them for the foolishness of the path they've chosen. You say, well, I don't believe that. I believe that if I can just get this or have this or accomplish this, I know it'll be okay. Really? There was at least one man in history who had both the power and the resources to say yes to anything he desired. He was the wealthiest man in the world, and he was the king. So there was no issue of resources getting in the way of what he wanted, because he had the most money of anybody in the world. And there was no danger of anybody telling him, no, you can't do that, because he was the government. And so he decided that he was going to give his all to saying yes to everything he desired. He was going to try pleasure to the fullest. What do you have to say about that? Ecclesiastes 2. I said to myself, come now, I will test you with pleasure. So enjoy yourself. And behold, it too was futility. I said of laughter, it is madness, and of pleasure, what does it accomplish? I explored with my mind how to stimulate my body with wine, so trying drugs, while my mind was guiding me wisely, and how to take hold of folly until I could see what good there is for the sons of men to do under heaven the few years of their lives. I enlarged my works. I built houses for myself. I planted vineyards for myself. I made gardens and parks for myself, and I planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made ponds of water for myself from which to irrigate a forest of growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and I had homeborn slaves. Also, I possessed flocks and herds larger than all who preceded me, and not just all who existed, but all who existed before him. Also, I collected for myself silver and gold, and the treasure of kings and provinces. I provided for myself male and female singers and the pleasures of men, many concubines. How many? 700. Whose sole purpose in life was to pleasure him sexually. Then I became great and increased more than all who preceded me in Jerusalem. He achieved. My wisdom also stood by me. All that my eyes desired, I did not refuse them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart was pleased because of all my labor, and this was my reward for my labor. I did it, and this is what I got for it. Thus I considered all my activities which my hands had done, and the labor which I had exerted. And behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was no profit under the sun. Stop believing the lie, brothers and sisters. There was the one man in history that we know of that had both the authority and the resources to not resist himself any achievement, any pleasure, and so he went out and got it, and it did not bring happiness. In fact, he even began to wonder if this is all there is, and our contentment is based on what we can accumulate or accomplish, is life better than death? He thought about that. In chapter 4, verses 1 through 3 of Ecclesiastes, he said, "Then I looked again at all the acts of oppression which were being done under the sun. And behold, I saw," in other words, seeing all the suffering. "And I saw the tears of the oppressed, and that they had no one to comfort them. And on the side of their oppressors was power, but they had no one to comfort them. So I congratulated the dead who were already dead more than the living who are still living." He said, "I looked at the people who were living and said, wow, you're worse off than those who already died." And then he said this, "But better off than both of them is the one who has never existed, who has never seen the evil activity that is done under the sun." Are we now beginning to see the absurdity of a completely materialistic view, atheistic view of life? The absurdity that it can be something good, that it can be fulfilling, that it can be purpose-driven and have profound results? The purpose of these first two sermons is to help us see the difference between not believing in God and believing in and giving oneself to God, and the impact that it has on whether or not life has purpose. Because the existence of God is the very issue at the very center of the meaning of life. So we're all impacted by the meaning. We're all seeking meaning in life. And whether or not God exists and how I relate to Him greatly impacts that primary of life's issues. So it matters. It matters greatly if God exists. In short, if God doesn't exist, life has no ultimate meaning, value, or purpose. None. Meaning has to do with significance, why something matters. Doesn't have it. Value has to do with good and evil and right and wrong. There is no basis for good and evil and right and wrong if there is no God. Purpose has to do with a goal. There is no definable, eternal, truly meaningful goal. So if atheism is true, then life is ultimately meaningless, valueless, and purposeless, despite one's protestations to the contrary. Now, this isn't to say that atheists have no perceived values, or that they all lead immoral lives, or that they don't see themselves as having a purpose for living. But William Lane Craig put it this way about people like that. He said, quote, "But my point is that, given atheism, these beliefs are all subjective illusions. The mere appearance of meaning, value, and purpose, even though objectively speaking, there really isn't any. If God does not exist, our lives are ultimately meaningless, valueless, and purposeless, despite how desperately we cling to the illusion to the contrary," end quote. So we're like prisoners on death row. We're all just going to cease to exist. We're all going to one day die. The only difference is when. Some go before others do, but all are headed to the same destination with a life void of significance. So if every person ceases to exist at physical death, what ultimate meaning can be derived from life? Does it matter that that person even existed? Oh yeah, because they had a legacy, they had an influence on the people that went behind them, the people that went behind them who are going to die too. Who are going to cease to exist too. It makes no difference. If God doesn't exist, we're no different than a swarm of gnats, a flock of geese, a herd of pigs. Because we end in nothing, we ultimately are nothing. Because on the span of eternity, we occupied a very tiny speck on that span of eternity before which we didn't exist, after which we don't exist. Therefore, we're nothing. And also, believing that there is life after death and believing that there is reward for good behavior and punishment for bad behavior impacts how we live here. As Dostoevsky wrote, if there is no immortality, then all things are permitted. And he wrote that from the perspective of understanding what life was like in the communist Soviet Union when evangelical biblical Christians were tortured for their faith. In fact, one of those men put it this way, who was tortured. He said, the cruelty of atheism is hard to believe when man has no faith in the reward of good or punishment of evil. There is no reason to be human. There is no restraint from the depths of evil which is in man. He said, you don't want to be tortured by somebody who doesn't believe in God. Why? Because with no God, morality dies. If there is no God, there's no objective basis for right and wrong, and we're going to get into this in detail in a couple of weeks. There is no objective basis for good and bad, for honorable and dishonorable. If there is no God, everybody chooses his own moral code, and no one can complain about what somebody else chooses. Let's say, here, all of you are this way. We're going to do a little role play. All of you think that when somebody hurts you, what you need to do is forgive that person. All right? That's what you think. What I think, again, we're speaking from a materialistic worldview, no God. What I think is that when somebody hurts me, the best thing for me to do is kill them. All right? Kill them. Why? That way they won't hurt me in the future. It's better for me. So I decide in my morality that when somebody hurts me, it's better for me to kill them. You decide in your morality that when somebody hurts you, it's better for you to forgive them. Which one of us is right? We both are. So how can that be? Why is your morality better than mine if there is no God? If everything is material, physical, why is your morality better than mine? Well, because it's better to do things for the good of other people. Why? It's not good for me. When I sacrifice for other people, I'm giving up something that I would have been able to use. Why is it good to sacrifice for somebody else? But that's the way it is if there is no God, y'all. Everybody is their own authority. And they decide for themselves what is right for them. Brothers and sisters, if God doesn't exist, said William Lane Craig, then you're just a miscarriage of nature, thrust into a purposeless universe to live a purposeless life. If there is no God. But what if God does exist? We'll answer that question next week. So, where are you? Are you an unbeliever trying to make sense of this world and you're frustrated by all your attempts? And out of desperation you're here, or because somebody invited you to come here, or you came here because a friend's being baptized? Not that you believe any of that stuff. What if you were like Solomon and you could say yes to anything you wanted? Would it matter? No. If you want to know how to have purpose before next week, email me. Chuck@moore.church. If you want to know how to have purpose for next week, walk down here and talk to one of these people that'll be standing at the front who do understand true contentment, true joy, true hope. What about you, Christian? You're a follower of Christ, But you're trying to get your satisfaction and your contentment through what can be touched and seen, through the material. When are you going to give up? That's a path that always leads to the same place. Despair. When are you going to surrender yourself fully to God? When are you going to surrender yourself to being light always, everywhere, so that you can have that contentment? Confess to God your sinfulness of seeking to find your happiness through the material, and ask Him to help you focus your life fully and totally on glorifying Him. Because if there is no God, there is no hope. And if we're not fully engaged with that God, we're headed to despair. Do you have meaning in your life?